Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam. This is All Across America. All right, Joel, you're a theologian, professor, author, and public lecturer whose work focuses on the intersection of religion, theology, consciousness studies, and the UAP phenomenon, otherwise known as UFOs. You're the author most recently of Exotheology, Theological Explorations of Intelligent Extraterrestrial Life. Joel, Parkyn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So this topic may, to some folks, feel far-fetched, but I would say it's the exact opposite right now, that this is really part of the cultural zeitgeist and is really of the moment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. I wrote this book. I got it published in 2021, but I had started it way before that, and it took about 6 years to get it to the point where I could get it published. But I've been thinking about these issues for a long time, and of course, I never expected that it would ever. I never expected it would kind of get this far in public awareness, as far as media attention, a serious, mainstream media attention, obviously, as a result of the congressional hearings and the serious attention of the Congress, and then of course we had the 2017 article by Leslie Kean and Blumenthal, and that started this whole process. And that was all unexpected. I've been following this since I was a kid, and of course, I've been studying the ufological literature for my entire life since I was probably about 8 years old. And so I started off, getting at this very early young, and I, of course, got every book I can get my hands on when I was a kid, and I never returned to the library. My mother had to pay for the books to replace them because I wouldn't return them. But anyway. So I've been a student of the ufology since I was a kid. So I started off in that lane, and then later on, I had a spiritual. Joined the military. I had a very, very powerful and quite unexpected spiritual. I would term it a spiritual experience, and that really I was going to be a career guy in the military, and I completely altered the trajectory of my life, and I got into looking into religion and spirituality, and that took me a different direction. But
and what branch?
Marines. U.S. Marines.
Marines. And so can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Well, sure. I mean, I was stationed in California, and I was assigned to an infantry combat unit, and I was an intelligence, so I was looking at a lot of this. I had a TS clearance, but I was assigned to an infantry regiment, so it was a pretty tough place to work, and I was in the field a lot. But I had an experience one day where I was out looking out to my barracks, and I just all of a sudden had this experience, and it was the way I could best describe it would be just a massive awareness of a benevolent, powerful presence, and I didn't know I could actually kind of locate it kind of to my right and above my head. It felt like it was actually kind of somewhat located, though I couldn't see it physically, but it was a very powerful presence, and it was unmistakable. And I definitely knew that I was not a product of my own mind. I never had an experience like this before, nor have I had one since. But it was very, very powerful, and it was really earth shaking, and it completely changed my awareness of what was going on, as far as my perspective on life and what I thought was real, and what I was going to do in my life. And it really changed the direction of my life. So it was incredible. And it was not very long, maybe a few minutes, didn't last very long, but it was something I never expected to happen. So it just changed my whole life, really. So maybe start pursuing. So I was determined to basically explore what that might mean. And of course, since I'm a guy born in Western civilization in the United States, and Christianity is the main religions are here, that I started looking along with Christianity, and that's where I started my journey. So that's what happened. But I was always I became a religious person where I wasn't raised religious. So I had, of course, like I said to you earlier, a very deep interest in ufology and that kind of thing since I was a kid. And then as a young guy, had this experience. I tried to later on said, how do I kind of square these two together? How do I square the idea, what I know about ufology as being a lot of factual stuff, and then the God and religion and that kind of thing, and revelation? How do I square these two together? And I couldn't figure it out. It was very, very difficult to understand how these two work together. And so I tried to over the years try to consult experts who I thought might have been experts, but didn't really know anything about it. And I looked for sources. I found basically nothing hardly at all. And so when I got to a certain point in my education, I decided to make this a serious research project for myself. And I tried to pin it down as to what's going on and try to gather as much information as I could to um, to understand how this whole thing works. And so it took me a long time. And then when I finally had found the data and data mined everything, it took me 6 years to actually produce the book as far as, going through all the material and then producing my own understanding of it. So that's where the book came from. So of course, when I had it published in 2021, uh, this is a long time ago as far as ufological terms, as
Sure
far as
is.
because so much has happened in the last 5 years. So I didn't expect. I fully expected this book to just gather dust somewhere because it's a scholarly book. It's very dense. It's got over 1,000 footnotes, and
It does.
it's not an easy read. And so but I felt it was really important to systematize what I call exotheology and to take what I thought was a very nascent and very scattered and fragmented um, subject, which some theologians have looked at, but the majority have avoided completely because of the inherent contradiction and difficulties with managing the ideas. And I um I put this together, and I wanted to what I could best do is to systematize a new exotheology, which would help us to understand how to deal with these ideas with religion and revelation, God, spirituality, and the idea of ETs, really ETs that are actually engaging. Not so the book is, I should say, this book is this particular book. It has to do with ETs as a hypothetical. It doesn't engage the ideas of ETs being on Earth necessarily. It says if they're out there, then what? Okay, so if they and then in the last chapter, I do go through contact scenarios or disclosure or discovery scenarios. And so those are kind of laid out too as well. So that is more relevant to what's going on right now. But like I said
Just to
earlier,
set the scene, what
yeah.
is exotheology?
Well, exotheology is basically using our current our current understanding of of Christianity, our Orthodox Christianity, and it's a new discipline, academic discipline, I should say. It's a discipline inquiry into looking at religious, theological, philosophical, psychological, and civilizational implications of non-human intelligence. So it places theology in dialogue with the space sciences, sociology, anthropology, um, consciousness studies, ufology, disclosure research, and it asks how theological concepts function when humanity is understood as one intelligent species among potentially many, and it distinguishes the discovery of extraterrestrial life from um, government disclosure and direct contact because it creates different theological problems. So that's a kind of like a very short, kind of quick explanation of what it is, but it deals with something that classical theology was not designed to do, because classical theology was basically developed within an exclusively terrestrial historical environment. What I mean by that, it was geocentric, it was anthropomorphic, and those dominant categories were shaped by ancient and medieval cosmologies in which Earth and humanity occupied the entire known area of intelligent life. So, um, and so what that means is like it concentrates primarily on God, humanity, revelation, sin, salvation, morality, scripture, religious institutions within one planetary history. So it was not designed to address, like, for example, multiple intelligent species or civilizations separated by vast evolutionary histories or religious development over cosmic times. So, and the traditional doctrines of Christianity is this is the tradition we're talking about right now. Assumes one fall, for example, one terrestrial salvation history, one incarnation, one sequence of revelation, without considering whether those claims might relate to other worlds. So classical theology um, develops category has categories doesn't have developed categories for non-human personhood or extraterrestrial moral agency, artificial or post-biological intelligence, hybridized beings, or radically different forms of the consciousness. So it lacks a sufficient framework for evaluating claims that non-human intelligence may have interacted with humanity and perhaps influence or potentially influence religious history. And so exotheology takes up where uh, classical or regular theology takes where it ends. So, like I said earlier, it examines these other questions that are outside of Earth, which traditional theology was never designed to do. That's why theology, I think, and I made this point in my brief to the Congress, in one of my 7 points I made, and I gave you a copy of the brief that I submitted to them.
Right.
But I distinguish this because this is exotheology is necessary for understand is a necessary theological discipline for engaging the disclosure subject, and so that's why this is so relevant right now. So, um,
You
it's not.
approach this in the Roman Catholic theological tradition. You said it's uniquely positioned to do so. Can you explain why that is?
Well, I can say yes to no and no to that question. So, um, my book Exotheology was framed within a Thomistic framework because I think the Thomistic philosophy and theology is the best tool to kind of frame this whole exotheological
St.
discipline.
Thomas Aquinas?
Yes, but it's not restricted by that in any way, and I wouldn't call it Roman Catholic necessarily in that sense.
Mm.
It's not restricted by Catholic categories or Catholic conceptions or theology in that sense. It can use as a jumping off point, but in no way is it confined or restricted by those by Catholic framework because the Catholic framework it has limitations, and so it doesn't really matter even if it's Christian in that sense, and we can get into that later if we have time. But it has to do with it's more of a human-centered understanding of how human beings with theological and religious traditions, whatever they may be, would how they would handle engagement with the idea of, with ETs and a variety of scenarios which could be happening now, or we can discuss that later, but that could be going on right now or potentially in the future. So, Catholic theology is helpful, but it's one of many implements that I could use to advance exotheology, if that makes sense to you.
And when you talk about a disclosure scenario, and you did make a distinction in the book of a disclosure scenario by the United States government, by the sighting of craft or beings, and I just wanted to say, just to take a step back, that a 4 tranches of UFO files have been released by the current administration and Department of War, and so the United States government its position has long been that there are unidentified flying objects in the sky by means of the very literal definition of that, which is unidentified objects flying in the sky. They have not posited whether they are extraterrestrial or foreign adversary, but that is the idea behind the concept of disclosure, is to disclose the concept of non-human intelligence. And NASA, within those files, NASA has also mapped out disclosure scenarios, and their disclosure scenarios range from the discovery of fossils to single-celled organisms, all the way up to extraterrestrial, non-human, intelligent life. And one of their recommendations was to frame it as celebratory, which I thought was really interesting. And I think maybe from the religious implications, there is maybe a concern that it could impact religions in a negative way, that it would cause the populations to abandon religion. But your theory says otherwise.
Well, to go back to NASA for a second, their perspective is typically quite rigidly scientific in that sense. It has a very non-religious strain through it, and that's not a problem for me necessarily. But they're number one. They're not considering the possibility whatsoever that we've had a history of interactions as has been documented by the ufological literature, which is massively extensive. Um, so um, so they are just kind of carte blanche getting rid of that, setting that aside. They're not willing to consider that the ufological literature has anything of value to add to this conversation whatsoever. That and which is important though is that what's available to us in ufological literature is being echoed almost exactly in as far as the recent whistleblower statements in Congress. So people who are well versed in ufology, when they heard David Grush or Lil Elizondo speak and each time, they didn't hear anything new actually. Now that sounded new to a lot of people who are now interested in the subject. But to people who are well versed in this or even personally versed in this for quite some time, didn't hear anything new. As far as the reverse engineering, crashing, retrieval, shooting down, etc. Sometimes finding a craft, coming upon these things, and then bringing them in and sequestering them in secret programs. That's nothing new to us whatsoever. That's been people who are in the know have been hearing about this, reading about this for many, many decades. So,
Yes.
so this it's completely consonant with what Legiophology has said many, many, many times, credibly. So, unfortunately, NASA is not willing to acknowledge that history, and so that's why I think you would say they have the quote unquote exuberant attitude towards this because they don't have a religious perspective what they may be potentially threatened with. So they look at it as a scientific project, and so of course SETI is the major arm it's now probably funded obviously, but it used to be a government funded program. But
Correct. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI.
yeah, so SETI is a very secular and scientific search for extraterrestrial signaling, and that's fine. But people who work at SETI are not going to are not going to acknowledge anything that I just talked about as far as ufological literature, and I don't know right now. I haven't heard anything, but I don't expect they would be accepting of anything that's been said in Congress in the last few years. So that's what's going on there. But the other question had to do with what was the other question? Had to do with the second question?
Well, it's understanding that this is part of the zeitgeist that's happening right now, and really, it's all about the background. But to get back to the idea of the compatibility with the concept of God, do you feel that disclosure in the existence of non-human intelligence in whatever form, how is that compatible with the concept of God?
Well, it's completely compatible in many ways. But what's more difficult to reconcile are doctrinal positions from particular religious traditions with the idea of ET. Those become problematic because considering. Let me ask you a question for one way first. God, is in a simply naturalistic way. God it could be considered the creator of the universe and creator of many different societies, including ours and here on planet Earth.
Right.
And so, we don't put restrictions on our concept of God being an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent creator being. And so, in that sense, we can't put restrictions on God, and that's fully consonant with, of course, most major traditions who believe in a supreme being. God has no restrictions. Islam and Christianity and Judaism and many Eastern religions would have no problem with that, doctrinally speaking, as far as acknowledging that God is a creator God and He has created this universe. And so, there's no problem whatsoever, doctrinally speaking, if He created other beings. And so the Catholic Church has already, mentioned that they have no problem with that doctrinally if there are other beings. That would just be basic expansion of what they of expansion of God's creation, basically. So there's no difficulty with that. I mean, it's similar to I would imagine their thinking is similar to when we discovered the New World and we found people living in the New World, and there was a question for a while like, are these people here? They're not Europeans, they're not white, they're not Christian, they're not civilized. Are they part of the human family? Are they descendant from Adam and Eve? These are some of the kind of primitive thinking back then. And should we consider them
Right.
part of human beings? And so, fortunately, the Pope at the time said yes, they should be considered part of family man. They should not be enslaved or made considered animals, that kind of thing. And they should be brought. They should be evangelized and brought into the family of human beings. So this is a similar kind of thing as far as how the Catholic Church in this case, has been thinking about this. Um, and they're open to the idea of there being other beings because of this basic reason. So that confidence rests on the idea of basic biology. It gets much muckier and much more serious when you start considering there might be differences as far as creed and code and doctrine and teaching and those kinds of things. And that's where it gets very concerning, and where Christianity is going to be. Christianity would have difficulties as one particular religion would have difficulties. So there's a range of things that we can get into as far as like what would be least concerning or challenging to Christian belief and practice. There's 2.3 billion Christians in the world. It's a big chunk
Sure.
of humanity, right? So, and then they may not all practice Christianity, but they usually think in Christian categories nonetheless. So that's why there's a psychological component to this whole thing. Even if you're not church going, people tend to think in these ways, even if they don't go to church. So we can get into those.
Are you saying that the concept of, the famous little green man would be much more likely by the average believer or non-believer to be accepted, rather than the thought that there has been presence on Earth for millennia, if not more, or the phenomenon doesn't actually have a physical form, that it may be something else, it may be from another dimension. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so you can maybe list a spectrum or make a hierarchy of different kinds of scenarios. So, say, the James Webb Telescope discovers on a distant exoplanet, which is searching for right now, right? It's searching for technosignatures and biosignatures, which would indicate an intelligent or biological race of beings on another planet. And that would have some real effects here, right? And they wouldn't be catastrophic, but they would be big. They would affect our understanding of creation and biology, and it would maybe make theologians think about how do we handle the idea of a second Genesis, right? So that kind of thing. That's least I would say that's least disruptive. Detection of microbial life that might have an effect. It might embarrass young Earth hyper anthropomorphic readings, but it likely would not affect mainline churches. So, and then if
Right.
we find distant radio signals like SETI, if they if they receive distant radio signals from an intelligent race, that would be slightly disruptive. But because there's no immediate relationship possible, but it would raise questions on
I see.
the image of God, sin, redemption, salvation. Christianity could assimilate that via the doctrine of creation, and because, like I said earlier, the divine freedom to create other beings. But there's more disruptive scenarios that we should consider, and I think the churches, obviously, this is one of my main criticisms with the churches and with people who have spoken on this publicly, whether they're J.D. Vance or whether they're exorcists or whether their statements come out of the Vatican. I think they're grossly premature, and I think I would say very naive, actually. And I would include Pope Francis in that because he said, he would be open to uh, baptizing ET. And
Right. Now he
uh,
famously said that, and
right,
Vice President J.D. Vance had
yes,
said that he believes they could be demons.
yeah. So these are people. So when I hear the demonological kind of reductionistic thinking like this, that's somebody that's not doesn't have access. That the closer somebody has access to the actual phenomena, no one says that. It's only people on the periphery who don't have any access who say that. So um, so it's concerning to me that religious institutions haven't done the work as far as understanding and researching ufological literature, which is massive, and that takes a lot of work to learn. That
Does.
takes many, many years. I mean, I've been studying since I was a kid, and I still don't know everything. I know a lot,
Yeah.
but there's always something I never heard about this case before. What is this? So it's
Right.
just there's
A and I just wanna say, having befriended Ralph Blumenthal, who was, the lead author in the 2017 article, that was released on December 17th of 2017 that you mentioned earlier, and he's the currently longest serving New York Times reporter. He's been with the paper for 60 years, and, he has said that anybody that really does the research will say to themselves, "Yeah, there's something there." And he's not saying that it's extraterrestrial, but what he's saying is that this is not something that you could have a cursory look at and decide at that moment. It's something that when you learn how much you need to continue learning. So I always suggest that people approach the subject, those that are new to it, with that open-ended understanding that you may understand key that there's so much to understand and you may not understand all of it.
right. So there's a lot to it, and so I have a very strong feeling, and I don't have access directly, but I do have a very strong feeling just based on my knowledge of this area and what I've read as far as leaks and whistleblowers are matter a lot, and so we've had many leaks over the years. You can't contain something forever, and that is how a lot of this stuff's come out over the decades. So a lot of the leaks that come out earlier were completely in line with what we've been hearing officially through the congressional hearings, and so a lot of that has to do with this kind of stuff. The stuff that has to do with the religious implications are also that there have been leaked information about that. Of course, it's hard to verify and vet, but I have a good feeling that a lot of this stuff is concerning as far as religion and theology, and that's why I think these questions should be we should get ahead of these ideas before that ever happens. We could have, I mean, Trump is a I do want to get into some of these other context scenarios if you don't mind, because I think they're
Sure,
valuable to think about.
please.
But before I get to that, I just want to say, that Trump is a wild card, right? He's unpredictable, and I think he may relish the idea of being the disclosure president, and that's kind of interesting to think about. He's obviously been very obvious and clear about what he wants to release stuff, and so he's been making efforts, obviously, to do that, and that's what this whole thing is happening, right? But um, it's hard to say how it's going to break out. I wonder if we'll get to a mass where enough people are coming forward, especially with the release of the NDAs, and then enough is going to become get out where a point where it kind of just opens up, and that's possible. Who knows? It's not hard to say. At least but um, there's no doubt that the people who are controlling the data are just going to wait out this administration, and then they can start from square one again with the next one, and that's been going on for a
Yep.
long time. So they have the ability to wait out this administration and just delay and delay and delay and push, and then just feed the troops. Like, as far as that's the phrase I use, as far as giving us the videos. The people want they want the data disclosure, they want the videos and the photos. Okay, here you go, but they're all non-specific, and they don't tell us anything. They're UAP. They're not
Yeah,
defined as
they
something.
feel like crumbs.
Right. So it's like, listen, you want UAP videos and photographs? Okay, here you go. Here's all the VFA videos, and here's the material without the metadata. How do you like that? So we're gonna get more. What it does is just fuels more speculation, and that's not helpful. But I think that we're kind of going off here a bit. But before I get back to the scenarios, but I think that that's purposeful on their part, not so much on the Trump
Mm.
people, but they're giving them what they want to give them. They're giving them what they want to give them. So that's designed to fuel speculation, and I think the speculation could be useful for them. And I think especially I tend to think that the demonological reductionistic interpretation of this is useful for them, because that could be a quote unquote they could serve as a kind of a faux disclosure in that sense. Like, well, it's demons, you guys. So if it's demons, that we already know what those are. So there's no mystery here. So we can kind of close this book and go away. So that doesn't help us. But if you give me a minute, I do want to continue with some of these other potential.
Yes, let's hear about the disclosure scenarios.
So I'd mentioned the detection of microbial life with the James Webb Telescope. That's definitely a possibility. I think within a lifetime, no doubt about it. As
Yes.
far as getting radio signals, I don't think that's going to happen. But if it does, I mentioned what the consequences could be, the immediate consequences anyway of that. Um, a more disruptive scenario would be if an advanced species if we encounter them and they're able to communicate in a meaningful and persuasive way, that they have a more advanced moral, philosophical, or religious development, or conversely, if they have no religion, that will be destabilizing for ours. So if they possess religion, that could destabilize our our earthly Christian exclusivist claims, which are very, very strong. So I mentioned these in my book in the last chapter. These kind of things. Um, if they possess a deep theology of ultimate reality, then earth religions could be seen as an immature local expression, and this could have profound effects. And so, in this case, Christianity may require a retreat from its long-standing universalist claims. So, because what you're having here is what I would call an epistemic, um, outside authority, basically. So you have it's an asymmetrical epistemic authority. What that means is you have two civilizations. One is massively advanced, say thousands or 10 or 20 or 100,000 years more advanced than ours technologically and socially, maybe even spiritually. And they're engaging in much primitive young civilizations such as ours. And that asymmetry is very, very difficult to manage. And so Earth traditions, which have exclusivist claims which go beyond the Earth, are going to be challenged in the face of a higher, more complete theology or understanding of the cosmos, as far as God's action in the cosmos. And so these are situations that potentially could happen. And so another one would be verifiable knowledge of human religious history, and if it potentially contradicts core claims. So this is about independent confirmation or disconfirmation of religious claims. So in that
Okay.
case, biblical events could have been misremembered, staged, technologically mediated, or perhaps deliberately influenced by NHI. Now that might sound heretical, but we have to remember that Christianity is a system of truth claims without evidence. We take these as
I
we make
see.
an assent. We as Christians we make an assent of faith to whatever denomination we believe in. We accept the crucifixion. We accept the idea of the Trinity. We accept the notion of the salvific redemption by Jesus on the cross. That created a metaphysical event where people's sins were forgiven, and this extended throughout the entire earth. These are metaphysical claims that cannot be proven, right? They're articles of faith that
Yeah.
we offer our faith. We give our assent to these as articles of faith. So in that sense, some of these claims are partially historical, some are metaphysical, some are other types. But my point is that um, some are partially, some are potentially falsifiable, some are not necessarily falsifiable. But it's a mixed bag. We don't know because metaphysical claims on in themselves are not provable. So if an epistemic authority come, meaning an AT race, says, listen, we've been uh, um, monitoring your race for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years, 100,000 years,
Wow.
and we understand that this is not what this is. Your understanding of your history is not quite exactly correct. These are all possibilities, and there's a reason why I make this statement.
And are you saying religious history, or are you saying world history when you say
World
the
hi-
understanding world history?
world history, and
Right.
our religious traditions, where they come from, that kind of thing.
I
Um,
see.
very catastrophic situation would be the credible disclosure of, say, genetic engineering or interference in humanity, the human species, or the intentional shaping religions. This wouldn't disprove God, but it would destabilize certain doctrines like creation, Adam, original sin, special election of the Hebrews, incarnation. Um, so
So it
religions.
doesn't disprove God, but it can disprove or potentially disprove various parts of the Bible. Adam and Eve being the most.
Well, it depends
Uh,
how you disprove it. Like, we'd have the source, right? So that's a whole different problem. Like, if we're told something that's 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 claiming to disconfirm what we believe, we have to vet that information through its source, right? And that's a whole different set of issues. How do you vet stuff like this? How do you confirm or disconfirm what you're being told? What is evidence, right? So these are all questions. So even in scripture studies and scripture scholarship, scholars debate what's evidence as far as the resurrection, as far as the
right.
apostles, as far as what Jesus said, what he didn't say, what did Paul say? We know that first it was thought Paul wrote 13 letters. Of course, scripture scholars later learned in the mid 18th century that he actually authored only 7. These kind of just Pauline letters were written by the authors who were writing in the name of Paul. So these are things that are debated among scripture scholars. So this is the same kind of process in a way of how people that are concerned and interested in religious claims, how they are verified or not verified. And oftentimes it's a mixed bag. Scholars disagree. I would imagine this kind of scenario, which I just related to you, you'd have pockets of disagreements. You have fragmentation. Obviously, you wouldn't have a monolithic response of Christians, 2.3 Christians in the world. You wouldn't get a monolithic response
Right.
to these kinds of things. Obviously, because you have different. We have it's like 35,000 different Christian denominations in the world.
Wow. I
So
did not know the number was that high.
it's probably higher. That's just in the United States, actually. There's probably more.
Wow.
So, but they all have basic agreement what the Bible says, but not what it means, right? Different interpretation. So it could be fragmentation is a very likely scenario, I would say, as far as this goes, because
And now,
you'd have fundamentalist thinking people who are very Bible based, very fundamentalist thinking, and they believe
right.
that the word is, it's sola scriptura, and what the Bible says it means. And then you have people who are much more liberal on the extreme other extreme end, who are much more flexible in their interpretation of the scripture.
Right.
So,
And
so Mhm.
you had mentioned earlier that because, we're dealing with the concept of God is dealing with the metaphysical, that it can't be proven, but then it also, I guess, the converse is that it can't be disproven either. And, for folks that may adhere to a more fundamentalist approach, could that kind of be the easy out, or, the way forward in that saying that, you know, because of the metaphysical, we can't prove nor disprove it, and therefore God still exists.
right. So that's absolutely true. And so a good point of this point you just made is the demonological perspectives that are coming out that are a direct result of coming directly as a response to the disclosures in the Congress and the footage being made available to us through the U.S. military, to the pilots and that kind of thing. So people who are more fundamentalist, more fundamentalist minded, say this is demons. Well, so 30 years ago, if you asked a religious person, a Christian, about ETs or aliens or contact or abductions, that kind of thing, they would typically say it's not real because the Bible doesn't indicate that. The Bible doesn't mention ETs. There's no mention whatsoever of other races outside this earth, and
I see.
God wouldn't allow this kind of thing to happen. He wouldn't allow another race to engage us in the way it's described in the ufological literature. That wouldn't be sense that God would allow that. He's a loving, good God, and that wouldn't make sense. So, but the main thing is that there's no mention in the Bible of this kind of thing. So if that's not there, especially something that is as critical and as important as this, then we're going to dismiss it as not real. But now, 30 years later, that we have actual data that's been confirmed by our own military, who's confirmed these are real things that they can't
Yes.
quite control or explain so far, right? That's an official statement. They do know what it is, obviously, but their official statement is they don't, right? But their response, their reflex response is it's demons. That's the next category of it's kind of defense mechanism. This is a fear based response, in my opinion. So
Okay.
it's like this doesn't fit in with my paradigm. So I'm going to retreat back into a demonological interpretation because that's what I know, and that's one of that's a category that is available to me in my paradigm where I can.
It almost speaks to that human need to be able to put things neatly in a box.
Yeah, so it has to fall within my perspective, and it can't fall outside of that because then there will be massive disruption in the worldview of as far as individuals and perhaps religious institutions.
I mean, in some respects, are people it almost seems like an optimistic view that there will be people who, um religious scholars and religious adherents who will be able to understand, disclosure in a way that is evolving in the concept of how they once understood religion, but then there will be others who will basically pave a different path, but still come out, in a meaningful way and just package it into demons or angels.
Right. So again, this is the fragmentation aspect I mentioned to you earlier. Is that because people are different, and even states are different. You travel across the United States. Every state has kind of its own culture, and people are different in different ways. I go to New Mexico a lot. I own land out there, and people are very different than Connecticut. I can tell you that. And
Yeah.
their perspectives on their worldviews are quite distinct from here in Connecticut, which is a somewhat stuffy place to live. Stuffy place to live. But it's just a different place. It's a different culture, and religious sentiments can be very different too. And engaging this topic is extremely difficult for Christians because we lack the categories to understand it. And that's why I think it was. I mean, I understand the church, the Catholic Church in particular, since that's what the tradition we're speaking of right now, has made the statement that's made as far as being open to the idea of biology, because that's a safe position to make. And they, as you know, the Archbishop of Washington D.C. let go of the exorcist of DC because he was making claims regarding. You heard about this in the news,
Yes,
um,
yes, that
about
was
that he
very
was saying
recent.
he was saying they were demons, and that was. And even though he's a demonologist and he's an exorcist, he needs to. I mean, I say this, that he needs to stay in his lane because that's not what he's a specialist in. This is not demons, and if he had done his homework and he had full knowledge of ufological literature, which is out there. It's a very dense, long, lifelong study to learn this stuff. It's very, very lengthy. It doesn't. You can't learn in a few years. It takes decades. I'm telling you this. It's very, very dense.
It's very true. It's very true. I've been following this since 2020 and, here we are 6 years into it, and, yeah, I would say it took me a good 5 years until I felt like I had,
Right.
a good chunk of it down, but it
Yeah.
is a it
Yeah.
it can be a lifelong pursuit.
Absolutely. It's never going. It's always going to surprise you. There's always something that's going to surprise you. It's a never-ending journey learning this kind of stuff. And so there's always something I'm even learning on this, and sometimes I get surprised once in a while, even though I've studied my whole life. But what I'm saying is that the Catholic institution, hasn't, as far as I know, I could be mistaken about this, but as far as I know, they did not have the experts in this field to speak intelligently to people making statements in the public about this. Pope Francis, before he died, he made statements like about baptizing out and TTs. Father Gabriel Funes, same thing. He said back in, I think, 2008, that they're a brother and they'd be open to baptism. Brother Guy Consolmagno, who's a former Vatican astronomer, head of the Vatican astronomy. I'm sorry, the Vatican Observatory, he said similar. He said statements in the same vein. And again, these are simplistic but naive things to say because we don't know the nature of them. There's a thing in theology called, theological anthropology. It's basically the study of how the human being as a composite being made of body and soul, how that person is composed by God, and
Wow.
how that being, how they're designed by the deity, and how they interact with deity and other creatures, and how it grows and how it learns and how it progresses spiritually, that kind of thing. So saying you're going to baptize an ET being who doesn't come from our planet and does not have our biology or necessarily our spiritual composition is a really gross distortion of what baptism would be if you believe in baptism, right? So these, I think, are just not helpful things to say. And what they say to me is that they don't know, they don't have the data. Otherwise, they'd be much more accurate in their language, I would say. So,
Right.
so they're making some really, I would say, pretty gross and naive statements about this stuff because they don't have data. They don't have the data, and obviously, they're not being advised properly on this. So, I wrote this book in 2021, and I didn't expect it to make too much of a splash because it's a niche subject, and
Yes.
it's a very density of scholarly text, so it's not easy to get through. And I did submit it to the Vatican Observatory, and they liked it and they thought it was good, but it kind of like nothing happened. And I thought maybe they would be more interested in looking at this from a theological perspective, but they kind of went back to, as far as I know, their main work is, they're all, priests, Jesuit astronomers, so they're all real scientists. They also happen to be ordained priests as well, and they're all, good guys as far as I know, and they will do very good work. Some of them are, like, I think, Guy Consolmagno, he's a meteor expert, and many of them make very good observation, do very good astronomy, and they do great photography. Space photography is beautiful.
Yes.
So I mean, that's all great, but I thought they would have more research into this, but they're not doing it. As far as I know, they're not doing the research in this
Well,
whatsoever.
it's great to have people like you doing it. And, one of my questions is, you mentioned
Sure.
this came out 5 years ago. How has your perspective changed, or has it?
It has changed actually. It's changed a lot, and it's changed. I would say it's evolved so much to the point now that I might want to change. If I could revise my text in some ways, I probably would. But that's okay. I'm writing another book right now. It should be coming out at the end of the year or early next year, and it's not a part two of this book. It's more like a companion volume that's looking at this from a different perspective. So what I got into, this book, is called Exotheology, has to do with looking at ETs, as I mentioned earlier to you, as a hypothetical, right? So if they're out there, then what, right? If they're real, then what's the implications for theology and religion per se? this book is this book focuses on um, examining the ufological literature, which is very extensive, and
Yeah.
finding within that literature what theological religious statements have been made to contactees or experiencers that are that are properly vetted and valuable to theology and religion, and how we take those and extrapolate those and try to put together a picture of what's actually out there as far as what they've said to us about what's actually out there beyond our earth. So statements about God and religion, or statements about God and the cosmos, and what's God is doing in the cosmos, and what religious forms might be out there, and what theological understandings are available to art out there that could be given to us. I'm interested in those and how they bear upon what we believe from our very quite small, limited, anthropomorphic, geocentric perspective. So that's what the book is about, and it's there's a lot there to look at. There's a lot of data mining I had to do that, right? So there's a lot there to work on, but I think it's a valuable thing. It has been done before, as far as I know. And so
Great.
basically, the working subtitle is Exotheology of Ufology, basically. So it's looking at the ufological data through the lens of exotheology, and trying to find out what's meaningful for theology that we can work with.
And so you're saying that there really isn't that framework for religious leaders to address the understanding of disclosure. And there was, I guess, an attempt at it, and there was a New York Times article that came out recently, which was an astounding article detailing a secret meeting that happened in February in Nashville. It was during a convention of evangelical pastors, and so it was an offshoot of that. And there were two operatives. They were described in the New York Times as intelligence operatives. Convened the meeting of folks in the evangelical mold who have touched upon the subject of the paranormal, and they were given a debriefing on the on disclosure. And this was all in the New York Times in the last month or two. What was your take on that?
Well, I right away I knew what that was. I think I know what that was. Okay, I'm giving my take on this, and I think it was in a very blatant and obvious attempt to steer the conversation socially in one direction. So,
Okay.
who they chose matters. They chose evangelical pastors who are universally very, very traditional, fundamentalist, conservative people, and they are not too much into scriptural interpretation. They're more into you read it and it means and read it, what it says it means. So they're fundamentalists, meaning you know what I'm saying by that. So they they believe that it's in the Bible is final word. It's inerrant. It's perfect, and if it's not in there, it doesn't exist. So in that case ETs are not real because you'll see pastors who have come out since that time, since that meeting, and they've made some public statements. It's completely in line with what I just said. They don't see it as they're not viewing the information they received as a way that I would look at it, or maybe you would look at it. They're saying, no, this is a demonological, eschatological reality. It's not potential ETs engaging us for maybe 80 years in the ways that the literature and the whistleblowers and leaks have indicated, and also a lot of the material we've seen from research like Richard Dolan, who's a phenomenal researcher, and
He
he's
is,
done
yeah.
he did national security state. He's done all the hard work. He's done all the hard work as far as putting together all the historical documents, all the military records, all the government data, and he puts it all together in a nice big package. And he demonstrates very powerfully that this is actually physical. It's real. It's technology. It's engineering. It's real bodies. None of this is spiritual. It may have spiritual effects and implications. It may have areas that it may overlap with spiritual effects and spiritual experiences, but that does not mean it's spiritual in that sense. It just means that it occupies probably the same what I would call interstitial space, kind of architectural term, but they occupy the same same interstitial space, I would say, that some of these other phenomena that we're familiar with in our own tradition are, like ghosts and demons and that kind of
Right.
angels, that kind of thing. I tend to think that they have access to the same areas, and that's why they get there's a um, there's a common overlap here, and I mean, there's an understandable conflation of these two things because of that. But what I'm saying, though, as far as the pastors, though, I think it was steered towards them purposefully to provide the reflexive response of a demonological interpretation, and
Okay.
that provides a soft quote unquote disclosure. I think so that
Right.
so if they feel it's a disclosure, then they speak for many people who are evangelicals, which is a good chunk of Christians in this country. And so they're going to take that and run with it. And that's helpful because it takes some pressure off the idea of this being physical. And we're looking for more data. We want more disclosure. We want more videos. We want to see the hardware and all kind of things. It's like, well, they're spirits, so we can just leave this alone now. We know what this is. And
I see.
that's what I see there.
Is it progress in some respects, though, that it seems like there are government entities or at least adjacent entities that are acknowledging disclosure. However, they're just trying to steer it and package it in a specific way.
Give me an example of that.
Well, I mean, by example of this meeting, and that they're saying that the phenomenon is real, but we're packaging it in the idea of demons.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be helpful for them to do that as a faux disclosure. Okay, so that would be
Okay.
helpful, I think, to take the pressure off, especially among some. I mean, it's not going to be convincing to everybody, but it'd be a satisfying explanation for many people, not just evangelicals, but many people who are living in the Christian paradigm and say, yes, this is a satisfactory answer for me because we've already believed this and this makes sense to me. So we don't have to worry about the other kind of stuff, and that could be satisfactory for many people. I can definitely see why that'd be useful for them. But
Yeah.
there are people who, obviously, the people like you and I, and many other people who are saying, no, that's not satisfactory to us because we know too much. This is not spiritual,
Right.
purely spiritual.
Right.
There are spiritual elements, no doubt about it, and that's why this can be that's why this interpretation can be um, um, it can be meaningful for people. But
Yeah, it almost seems like a high level, intersection of public policy and religion in that, maybe some facet of our government, working with theologians has identified a subset of Christianity that would be most affected by the concept of disclosure and are basically giving them a soft landing so they could, better understand it or better deal with it, knowing that there will be a larger subset, hopefully, of religious adherents that are able to accept it in a new, theological system.
Yes, I think it's possible. We don't have obviously proof, but I think it's
Of
very
course.
probable. Yes, but what this is, I think, obviously, is that it's a taking advantage of the ignorance of the people. Okay, so and this goes from down to the people who are in the churches of these pastors up to the Vatican hierarchy because they don't know the data. And this is I can't emphasize this enough. They don't know the data. They don't have the data. They haven't made themselves they haven't made the data available to them. They haven't done the work,
Right.
put it that way. So, and this goes from, our ordinary churchgoer up to the Vatican. They haven't done the work and they haven't done the research, and that's just how it is. As far as I can tell, just based on what people say, I can tell they haven't done the work. If they did, they wouldn't be saying what they're saying. Even the Collins Elite, they have they're supposedly insiders, and they said that they think these are spiritual phenomena. But if you look at that carefully, they don't have access to the actual material. They're very religious people, but they don't have direct access. So they're left to speculate according to their Christian paradigm, and they're in the same situation. If they had people who had direct access, never say this stuff. They say it's real, it's physical, it's
Yeah.
engineering, it's biology. Okay, so this is again, like I said, people taking advantage of people's ignorance. Not the ignorance is, I'm not saying they're stupid, but they just don't know. So
What do you mean by Collins Elite?
you haven't heard that before? Well, they're supposed to be they're supposedly they've been talked about a lot. They're a group of people who been around for a while, many decades, who are insiders in the government who are aware of of these secret programs being crash retrievals and reception of bodies and and rear engineering, that kind of thing. But they are kind of keepers of the secret, or they're aware of it, but as far as I know, they don't have direct access to the material. So they tend to think that this is a demonological you know um, um, fraud, basically, and it's nothing to do with actual ETs, the actual craft. So they dispute that, and they said this is just it's a problem. It's a religious problem, and so this is not physical stuff. It's a religious it's a theological religious issue with demons, that kind of thing. So that's my understanding of it. So I don't think they have access. Otherwise, I wouldn't be saying this. Anybody who has that access never says this stuff. They never say it. Um, so
Right.
so that's how you can tell. So anybody who says demons, they haven't read. They're not well read. They're just not.
You wrote and you had submitted an executive summary. It's entitled "The Executive Brief for the House Oversight Committee and the Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets." Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and
Sure.
the goal behind submitting that.
The goal behind that.
Yes.
Sure. So, it's actually a two-page summary I produce, and I'm planning on getting it printed in the media. I'm not sure where yet, but I want to get it published because I'm not entirely confident that the Congress is going to do something about this. But I felt it was important to make them aware. What I thought were some very important aspects of disclosure, which were being not being covered. And so I wrote an 18-page document, which I was going to give them. But because the last meeting we had with the Whittier Foundation was not an official congressional hearing, I couldn't enter it into evidence, right? I couldn't enter it into the record because
I
they
see.
have rules for
Yeah.
this, right? So, but I did physically hand that to some of the members of the congressional committee. But my concern was there were 7 points on this letter, and they have to do with number one, the that the disclosure is not necessarily not only a national security issue, It's actually something that has to do with much broader concerns of society, and these are have to do with social aspects, right? Not just to secure the United States, but has to do with what's happening socially. I tend to think we're at a liminal civilizational stage, which is transitioning from like a self-enclosured of society to participation in a larger ecology, meaning a cosmic ecology. And so there's implications as far as for, in domains occupied by religion, philosophy, psychology, and culture. Um, there's impacts on individual, social, psychological, religious, and human self concept. Concept I said.
Yeah.
And so these things matter. So if you look at disclosure conversation going on nationally, these are not covered typically. They're not covered whatsoever, especially by the media. They're not. The conversation is not there. So I thought it was necessary to bring this to the attention of the people involved. The second one had to do with the religious implications, which I felt were being significantly underexamined. And so I talked there about how Christianity was able to adjust to certain revolutions in its life, but this kind of revolution, if we had a contact event, just as early I described it to certain scenarios, how it would manage that. I don't think it would necessarily manage well as it did in past because in past revolutions they were all human. They came from us.
Mm,
This is like I said, an epistemic authority outside of humans, which is going to inform us, and there's a whole complication involved with that, and that hasn't happened before. So we shouldn't be too confident that that will be managed just as easily as our past revolutions, say Darwinism and
mm,
Copernicanism, for example. Um, so um, the third one has to do with, you know, the two responses as far as we talked earlier about how religious institutions are kind of narrating this whole thing and
right.
and so there's basically two weaknesses I identified, and one had to do with the demonological reductionism, which we already discussed a little bit already about that, and how a retreat into demonological framing is a kind of it's an old historical mistake, and they thought that diseases and volcanoes and lightning and all kinds of things in ancient times were caused by deities. Science has displaced that completely, and we know what they are now. And so this phenomena, it may seem it's elusive, it's kind of furtive by nature, so it might easily seem to fit within a demonological category because of that. And there are aspects of that which may seem like these are demonologically connected, but that's a result of a very thin reading of the material. It's not derived from someone who's really knowledgeable about this stuff. If you do know it, it's not that's not that whatsoever. There is that demonic activity, obviously, but that's not what this is. There are some cases which I think probably are, but not the actual contact cases that we know that are verifiable. No way are they demonological. So I kind of get into that. The other mistake is that religious response is that the overconfidence I told you earlier. The Vatican is very confident we can handle this, but they don't understand. They're actually talking about another biology. They're not talking about these other scenarios that I listed. I didn't list all of them. We didn't have time, but they're not considering these other aspects.
Right. You
Ted,
don't know what you don't know.
you don't know what you don't know, and it's not good to think that you know everything because that's not how this works. So Ted Peters, a Lutheran theologian in California, he did a thing called the ETI survey. I think it was back in 2008, and he asked people, "How would you feel about ETs being real? Would that affect your life? Would it destroy your religion? Would it cause psychological stress?" And the study came out and it said that most people who were religious felt very confident that the religious would be robust in an environment where this was confirmed, right? And a lot of the atheists he asked were very confident that the religious people will be in crisis. But that's kind of funny. But what he didn't, I think, what he failed to do in that study, and I mentioned this in my book, is that he didn't discuss the actual content. It's just the notion, okay, the simplistic notion of ETs being real. How would you feel? Well, okay, did you discuss, what's the scenario we're talking about? Are we talking about a signal from space from 150 light years away? That's one scenario, not very disruptive. Or are you talking about abduction on the scale that we're looking at in the ufological literature? A very different situation. And so he didn't engage that whatsoever. He didn't engage any of those scenarios. It was more of a hypothetical questioning. So, if you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. You
Right.
didn't put sufficient data into the model, and they got very simplistic answers out of it, and they're not helpful in my opinion. So
So you're a professor of theology at the Holy Apostles College and Seminary. So you're teaching young seminarians. What are their reactions to this as, the next generation of leaders in the church?
they have no reaction to this because this is not part of the curriculum.
Right.
So I teach scripture there, and at a graduate, and postgraduate level, and we don't engage scripture because that's not part of the curriculum. Now, if I'm asked privately about this, I can be happy to provide answers, and some have asked me privately. But
Okay.
most of the students there are seminary students. They have a very tight and restricted course load they have to take to get their requirements for their studies, and so they don't really get the opportunity to many electives. I've offered electives, but they're busy people, so they don't have much room in their curriculum for electives, any kind of elective really. They've taken a lot of core courses, required courses for their studies, but they're not. I mean, I want to do a course in science and religion, which I think may touch on this tangentially, which might be helpful and interesting to people. But it's hard
Okay.
because it's a very traditional Orthodox school, and they they don't have the space for that right now. So I can't, as much as I'd like to, I can't engage that with that environment right now because of the curriculum. So that's the answer to that.
Well, getting back to your submission, you
Yeah.
had a few other. You had disclosure, discovery, and contact must be distinguished. I guess that's getting into what we've been talking about in this conversation is distinguishing between the different scenarios, and that there are many different levels of disclosure.
There are, but there are three fundamental scenarios as far as how we categorize these. So if you wanted to make like a graph, I mean a flow chart, you'd have disclosure rate, discovery, and contact at the top across, and then you have within each one of them you'd have other boxes and lines below those which would break those out, right? So disclosure can take many forms, right? And discovery could take many forms as well. Contact, again, different types. So discovery, so I can kind of maybe map them up for you just really simply right now, just for the purpose of our conversation. Discovery involves like science independently confirming ET. It involves usually, in an event in which humanity detects something like microbes, technosignatures, biosignatures, artifacts on maybe a satellite in our solar system, probes, signals, or maybe ruins, perhaps. And there's been claims like this. If you've been paying attention, there's been claims that there's actually some types of ruins on Mars and the Moon. So these are not just wild speculation necessarily, but these can be intellectually disruptive, but they're socially containable. Okay, because when a discovery happens, it's being managed and filtered through the authorities, right, through the government or through institutions like educational institutions and perhaps also religious institutions. So discovery is somewhat more manageable. It's not really that fluid. Disclosure in contrast, involves governments acknowledging existing knowledge. They've known it for a long time, and we're going to acknowledge we've known this for a while. And then I say that they've known it for a long time, but they'll say we know this. They won't tell you how long they've known it. So it's but disclosure, as I'm sure you're well aware, is mediated through institutions, right? Governments, military bodies, scientific groups, religious authorities, or maybe even the intelligence departments themselves. So there's evidence of secrecy, there's contact, there's crash retrievals, there's agreements, concealed knowledge of human origins, perhaps. That could create a legitimate crisis. So disclosure can be something that can be maybe managed in some ways, and there might be aspects that can't be managed. So we're
Let,
to discuss some aspects of those, right?
let me
Contact,
ask you.
yes.
Let me ask you this: if you had a representative in the United States government approached you and asked for your advice on how disclosure can best happen, what would you say?
Well, I would probably tend to agree with most of what they're doing now, to be honest with you. That sounds like kind of crazy. It kind of, let me say that,
Wow.
but I think that um, so much of this it depends on our state of of our civilization. So I think that there are real good reasons potentially for why they're not telling us the full disclosure story, and these have to do, I think, pertaining to the things we've been talking about. So there are, I think, likely religious, theological, and philosophical things that will be very disruptive to our society. And if you consider, just the demonological stuff we talked about, it shows that there's a sector of society who are not ready for this because they are hunkering down to the demons, because they're hunkering down to the demonological perspectives because that's what they feel is safe and that's secure to them. So no matter what kind of disclosure you have, if any kind of meaningful disclosure is going to cause an array of varying effects in society. So I would say, there are some things that I think we should be made aware of, and some things we should never be aware of, at least not for a long time. We're not quite ready civilizationally. And that's a whole different conversation as far as, you know, we're a primitive civilization, we're a young civilization. We haven't really managed to leave our solar system yet, as far as, people traveling. We haven't really, we haven't put any settlements on any of our satellites on our planets on our solar system. We're a very young civilization. So I tend to think this is we're living in we are living in we're witnessing, kind of like a liminal civilizational threshold event. We're transitioning from a traditional self-enclosure awareness to beginning of a participation in a larger ecology of intelligence. So, it's like, it's when a younger planetary civilization becomes gradually aware that exists in a larger field of intelligence that has already been there. So that's a very kind of big kind of macro statement. But my point is that we have to kind of properly understand where we are civilizationally and social psychologically. And I don't think we're quite there yet. I'm not a social psychologist, but I know enough about it to understand that it's probably not wise to like let everything come out. Because if you say, okay, if Trump comes out and says, we're not alone, okay, that would be a massive thing. That'd be probably the biggest news ever made in history. But
Sure.
and then what's following that? So it's kind of like, you got the wedding and then you got the marriage.
Right. That's a very good way to put it.
Every bride wants the wedding, but does she think about the marriage necessary? Or maybe the husband too, right? So
Yeah.
they consider
No,
what
it's a
the
very
after
good way to
effects.
put it.
Yeah, it's a useful analogy for this because it's exciting to get married. It's exciting to find out something new that we didn't know before, that we always suspected was there, but we never knew for sure, didn't have the evidence. And so we have to understand that there's a honeymoon period and then there's the reality.
Yeah.
And I
Now
tend
you're living together.
right. So I tend to think that that the reality can be maybe very difficult to deal with in a lot of these areas we've been discussing today. So if you say that we're not alone, then you've got a million questions that follow that automatically, and you have to have prepared answers for that. So, as a military or governmental institution, not just the United States but other countries as well. And so we have other countries are dealing with this too. We're not the only country. I mean, there's many countries in South America, and Russia, China. They've all been engaging this as well. Not as publicly as we have, obviously, but this is not just a United States, a U.S. problem. But
Correct.
but anyway, so to answer your question, I think it would be um, tread very carefully about what you tell people because society right now, I wouldn't say it's as mature as it was at maybe 1950s, 1960s. Um, Religious confidence is not the same as it used to be true, right? So, I mean, I think it's like 17%
Yes.
of Christian Catholics go to church nowadays. I don't know the number as far as Christians who don't attend their own church or that kind of thing. I don't know the numbers, but I know they're nothing what they used to be, right? So more people are saying they're non-religious and they're more spiritual than ever, right? So because of that, we could say that maybe people are not going to be as affected as far as their religious perspectives or doctrinal understand acceptance than they used to be. It wouldn't be as disruptive. But all of it depends on how not just what's said, but how it's said. Right? It's not just what's communicated; it's how it's communicated through the media and the media apparatus. So it's a very. I'm sure you can appreciate this. It's an extremely complicated thing. So it's a very, very complicated thing in doing this, and I understand it. So maybe you've heard this before from people that you talk to about this subject, but that's why I think it's correct to say that this is really kind of a graduated disclosure process. This is not
Mm,
we want disclosure, and I know you're working for the Disclosure Foundation, which is an amazing
right.
place. It's an amazing thing that you guys are doing. But it's we're looking at it's a long journey. It's I tend to
Yeah.
think if you say 1947 was the beginning of this of our scientific and modern engagement with this phenomenon. I think it predates that by quite a bit, obviously, but our scientific and our modern engagement with the phenomena, I tend to think it's probably a 1 to 200 year plan
Wow.
to basically a civilizational acclimation project. So it's like, it's going to get us used to the idea of this and gradually bring us up to the point where we're ready to. So there's like civilizational symmetry, put it that way. So that,
Yeah.
our civilization and the civilization that's intending or wants to engage us. And by the way, it's not just one civilization. I'm sure there's just many civilizations that are claimed to be contacting and engaging us. Um, you know, um, so that's a whole different topic. But the point is that um, we'll have civilizational symmetry, so the when contact happens, it'll be fluid. It won't be two fists coming together. It'll be more of a fluid kind of easier process. That's what I tend to think right now. I've been thinking this a long time, but that's where I'm still at there. I'm still there. I'm still thinking that's probably what the plan is. But like I said before to you, Trump is a wild card. I mean, this might break open in a way that's unexpected right now in the next few couple of years until the end of his administration. So if you're read in on the ufological historical documents, then you wouldn't understand that we're living in a very interesting and important time right now,
Sure
because
are.
we've never had this happen before. I mean, we had congressional hearings in the 1950s about this, so it's been a long time since we had this
Yeah.
congressional attention. We've had for the first time ever, really, mainstream, modern mainstream acceptance of this stuff, and there's no ridicule. It's gone. You don't see
Yeah.
ridicule
Yeah.
anymore.
No. No.
That is a sea change, obviously, and so
Yeah.
that's highly significant because media has so much power as far as um, psychological influence on people and how they interpret
Yes. And
things.
we're not getting the jokes of little green men so much
No,
anymore.
no,
And you
they would realize that it's more valuable to them to take this seriously than to mock it.
that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And you talked a number of times about the historical record. What books, what resources would you recommend for folks? And again, we have a very general audience.
Right.
What books for people just getting the subject? What do you recommend? Where do you start?
I would say the main text I would start, and I've told this before, is Richard Dolan. He's an amazing researcher.
Yeah.
He's been around a long time, and he wrote the UFOs in the National Security State. He's written 2 volumes of this book, and each one covers a certain time period where the United States engaged this, and he details the events, the government's response, military records. He backs it all up. It's an amazing book, and he's done his homework. He worked very hard on it for a long time. And so I would definitely recommend it. It's not an easy book to read. It's a very lengthy book, but if you want to get started in it, you start there, and he gets you started. He's a very good writer. He does a great job. So I would just say get that book, and he has many. He's indexed many other book works that he's referenced. So you can take that book and start with it. If you were taking a class, say a college class in this, if I was teaching a class like that, I would probably use this text as my textbook, and then I would have
Yeah.
my students make sure that they go through the bibliography and
Yeah,
see what other text.
marvelous
Yeah,
book. I mean, it is the OG. It is really the original
yeah,
research document, and it's so impressive that it was done, basically in the pre-internet era, and
right.
it's a dense doorstopper of a work, and there are 2 volumes of it, and it is a really great addition, I think, not only to the to ufology, but to potentially the historic record down the road. Um, so we've got a few minutes left. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I'm curious to see how this is going to play out the next few years, right? So Trump's got another couple. He's got another couple of years left, I think, in his administration. He's got people in place who are very motivated. Apparently, it seems to me, very motivated to keep this going. And then the Congress members, Paulina Luna and Eric Burlison, very impressed with their efforts to make this keep going. So they've got a team in place now we've never had this before. This is like we've never had a group of people who are this concerned and interested, and they really want this to work. They're doing what they can at the executive level to make this happen. So I'm really interested to see how it's gonna roll out the next few years. And it's I sometimes I think when I look at the videos and the photographs, obviously they're not very compelling. They're not very interesting because I've seen this stuff for many years. I don't see any.
Mm,
I don't find it compelling whatsoever. But to people who haven't seen it before, I understand it might be interesting. But what I find more interesting than that, than what's being released, every few weeks or something, is how who's actually behind what are the mechanisms that are going on behind the releases, like who's being pressured and who's doing the releases. And it's always very amorphous who's doing the releases. Like who is the person actually signing off on this stuff? Who's not signing off? This it's kind of very it's very nebulous. to what's going on behind that, and I find that interesting. So I'd like to see more from the Congress as far as digging into who's actually doing the record searching and who's doing the blacking out and the redacting and who's releasing and who's covering up the metadata. Like, okay, who are these people? So I'm interested in seeing that, and that would be very valuable. Even historically, if we don't ever get disclosure like we want it in the next, say, 10 to 20 years, it'd be valuable just as historical record that we were able to dig down far enough to see what's actually going on, which has been going on for many decades. So that's my interest as far as the governmental push and what's in the news. Of course, that's one aspect of this. There's many elements of this, there's many phases of this stuff.
Right.
But I'm obviously I'm a religious person, religious scholar, theology scholar, and I'm very, very interested in how this works out as far as our perspectives on supernatural.
Yeah.
I'm not so much interested in trying to reconcile doctrinal positions within the Christian teaching with this kind of stuff. I've already done that already in my first book. I'm more interested in how we understand humanity vis-a-vis a cosmic reality, a cosmic engagement with other beings, and how that plays out. So the book I'm working on right now is I've been working on it a long time since I finished my last one. And I'm on my 5th year working on it. It's very, very lengthy. I might have to split it. I might have to cut it in half because it might be too long for the older.
Wow. And the working title is?
Cosmic Contact, and then it's Exotheology, ufology, but it may be too big to be digestible.
All right, we'll have to split it in half. Yes,
I might have to do that. Yeah. So,
and how can people find out more about you?
My website is exotheology.space. That's where you can find the book. I sell it cheaper than the publisher sells it for. They think they sell it for like $43, which for the soft cover, and I sell it for $30. I'm on Instagram, Star Lab Press, and that's
Spell that?
Star Lab Press.
Star Lab Press.
Yeah,
all right.
Yes,
Star Lab Press.
Yeah.
All right.
I have
excellent.
So that's the Instagram. I give you the email if they want to email me. I'm on LinkedIn if they want to send me a message. They want to contact me, ask me a question. So that's where you can get me.
Joel, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about this subject for a long time, and I think we'll be talking about this subject for a long time to come.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk soon. All Across America is produced by me, Marco Vig, in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Visit us on Instagram at All Across America. Check out our website, allacrossamerica.com. There's an interactive map with all our episodes, and there's a Contact Us page where you can send your reactions, guest ideas, and suggestions. So get in touch, stay connected. To me, that's what podcasting is all about. Thanks for listening.